guys, my name is Heather Harbin and I am a teacher. I'm starting my 16th year of teaching. And I thought about typing this really long message on Facebook and figured that most people probably wouldn't read through it. So I thought it might be easier just to make a video. But I know that parents in our area and many areas across the country and across the world are facing a decision that they've never had to face before. And that is, what am I going to do with my kid this fall when it comes to school? As parents are considering their different public school options, there are schools near us that are doing totally online, schools that are doing a hybrid online mix. There are some schools within driving distance that are going back 5 days. But these are all in different districts. And so parents are now, for the first time maybe ever, thinking about what else is there besides public school. And they're thinking about Christian schools or private schools in their area. They're thinking maybe of homeschooling. And it's a decision that most parents maybe haven't really given much thought to. Maybe you have, but the purpose of this video is to share with you my journey. I was a public school educator for 6 years, and I've been in the private sector now starting my 10th year. And I used to have no interest in Christian schools or private schools. I didn't have any plan to teach in a Christian school. I had no plans to send my child to a Christian school. And it wasn't because I hated Christian schools. I grew up in a Christian family and a minister's family. I went to church all the time, but just Christian schooling wasn't important to me. And so I'm going to share with you today what I used to think about Christian schools, how my thinking changed, and kind of address some of those things that I used to think and what I think about them now. Hopefully that will give those of you who are new to private schools and Christian schools a little bit of information about the journey that I've made, and maybe it will answer some of the questions that you guys have about Christian schools as well. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I already mentioned I've been an educator now for 16 years, and I grew up in public schools. I grew up in the Midwest, and I went to public schools K through 12, all the way through. It wasn't until my college years that I actually ended up going to a private school. I had fantastic teachers. I loved all of my schools that I went to. I loved my teachers. I loved learning. I had a wonderful experience in all of my schools. I have teachers who have influenced the kind of teacher that I became, who influenced the kind of person that I became as well. So I'm not here to bash public schools. I had a great experience in public schools. But what I realized as I became older and really kind of started to think about my thinking and think about what I believe about the world, I realized that there was this disconnect in my life. I kind of had these two houses, if you will. I had my education house and my faith house. So school was where education was to take place. That's where I did math and science and English and foreign language. That was over here. And then faith house was church and missions trips and everything else kind of in the faith aspect. And these two things really didn't intersect. I lived my life in a certain way when I was over here in my education world, but what I believed about God and what I believed about creation really never connected to what I was learning. The reason that I was learning the things that I was learning was so that I could get a good job, so that I could have a good career, so that I could get into a good college and get scholarships and, one day take care of my family. That was my purpose over here in education world. My faith world over here, my purpose was totally different. My purpose was to love God and love others. And there was this disconnect, and it never bothered me. It didn't bother me in high school. It didn't bother me in college. It didn't bother me for a long time. I don't think I ever realized that I had these two different kind of compartments in my education or in my life system. And so I grew up with those two kind of different compartments. And I think what jumps out to me and kind of made me realize that I separated these two was when I went to college and I went to a private Christian university. And I remember one of my first classes, my professor walking in and opening class with prayer. And I remember looking around like, what is this guy doing? We don't pray at school. And oh yeah, Christian university, we can do that. But it was weird. It was odd to me. And this is somebody who grew up in a church, and it was weird to have another Christian come in and start praying in school. And that was kind of my first indication that I had these two separate houses, these two separate domains, that education was supposed to be here and faith was supposed to be here. And it was weird that they were mixing. Now, I didn't, turn around the next day and go, oh, well, now I'm going to teach in a Christian school. It wasn't for many, many years that I really realized that I had these two disconnecting pieces. I pursued my degree in education, and the university where I went would have different Christian schools come in and share about their schools and try to recruit us to teach in their schools. And I was never interested. I remember saying I was never going to teach in a Christian school. I just had no desire to do it. There were a lot of misconceptions that I had about Christian schools. I didn't want to send my kids to Christian schools. And so I am going to share with you how I went from no interest in Christian schools to being a teacher now for almost 10 years in a Christian school, and what changed my thinking. And I want to share with you some of the misconceptions that I had and address some of those today to hopefully clear up any misconceptions that you guys have as well. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, I speak a lot in metaphors. I love metaphors, and I understand things really well. So for those of you who are parents out there, and I'm assuming if you're a parent, you're watching this, we've all had that experience with a picky eater, right? Where we try to serve them something new and their response is, I don't want it. Why? I don't like it. Have you ever tried it? No. Then how do you know you don't like it? I just know. I don't like it. Okay, maybe you even have some adults in your life who are like that. Okay, I was the picky eater when it came to Christian schools. I had a lot of different things that I believed about Christian schools, never actually having done any research or looked into Christian schools. I just had these misconceptions, and I'll be completely honest with you, I have no idea where they came from. I went to public schools. I'm not sure there was actually a Christian school in our area when I grew up. I don't know of anybody that went to a Christian school. So I'm not basing these ideas that I had off of people that I knew. I can't even think of anybody that I knew who was homeschooled. Everybody went to public school. Everybody in my neighborhood, everybody in my church that I can think of went to public school. But somehow I ended up with these ideas about Christian schools. No clue where they came from. And maybe you have the same ideas, and I really just challenge you to not be the picky kid who doesn't try things out, but do your research, look at what's available to you. If it's a Christian school, great. If it's homeschool, fantastic. If it's a public school or some kind of charter school or a mix between the two, great. Find what works for you. But don't be afraid to actually look into things and do some research and find out what's true and what's not. So let's take a look at the misconceptions that I had that maybe some of you have as well. So my first misconception was this: Christian schools offer subpar education. Like I said, I went to great schools, and I had some great teachers, wonderful teachers who are still teaching at those same schools. And somewhere in my mind, I had this idea that Christian schools just didn't have as good of an education system. They couldn't have. Public schools were so great. Christian schools are small. Nothing that's small can be that good. So it's just not quality education. Okay, that was my first misconception. I'll tell you what I think about these things now as we get later on in the video. The second thought that I had about Christian schools was that their teachers just weren't the best. They didn't have good teachers. Why would I want to teach somewhere or send my kids somewhere that just had mediocre teachers? The third misconception that I had was that Christian schools are for rich families. I have never been rich, and I don't anticipate that I will ever be rich. So in my mind, there is no reason to even look into Christian schools, even if I were interested, because I couldn't afford it. A fourth misconception that I had over the years was that Christian schools are outdated. They're using things from the 1980s, and they're still singing Kumbaya and camp songs from the 70s. And, they're using overhead projectors, and teachers just, they're retired teachers. They are using methods that they used back in the 60s or 70s when they taught. And I just had this idea that they were outdated. And why would I want to teach or send my kid to a school that wasn't keeping up with the latest educational research and trends? The fifth misconception I had was that Christian schools are just like public schools, but with a Bible class and chapel. Now, I didn't have all these misconceptions all at once. These are just some of the misconceptions that I had over the years, from the time that I really started thinking about Christian schools in college to the time where my thinking radically changed. So I thought, what's the point? Why would I pay money to send my kid to a school that's just like a public school but has Bible class and chapel? Like, why not just send them to public school? There was nothing different. It's just Bible class and chapel. We can take care of that at church. So I didn't really see any difference. The sixth misconception I had was that Christian schools only use Bible-themed curriculum. Now, what I mean by Bible-themed curriculum here is that, in my mind, I think mostly elementary schools is what I was thinking here. Christian schools use stories that were Bible stories only. When they did math, it was using Bible stories to help them learn how to do math. You know, like Noah got on the ark. He took 2 elephants and 2 zebras. How many animals did he have in all? You know, silly stuff like that. That's what I thought was taking place in Christian schools. The seventh misconception I had was that Christian schools try to shield kids from the real world. I had this idea that Christian schools were trying to be a bubble and parents were putting their kids in Christian schools to protect them from the world around them. And I didn't want that as a teacher or as a parent, and I'll get into that a little bit later about why I didn't want that, but that's what I thought Christian schools were doing. And the eighth misconception I had was this fear of missing out. You know, Christian schools just don't have all of the same things that public schools have. They don't have all the same opportunities. And if I teach or if I go to a Christian school or send a kid to a Christian school, they're not going to have all of these same advantages as public school kids. They're going to miss out on something. So those were kind of the 8 biggest fears I had about teaching in a Christian school or sending my kid to a Christian school throughout my course of, like I said, really from the time I started in college, where I started being recruited by Christian schools up until the point where I had this tipping point and my thinking changed and I moved to becoming a Christian school educator. So let's go back to what I was talking about earlier with the 2 houses. And I want to tell you how my worldview shifted. So for those of you not familiar with the term worldview, it's basically your perception of the world, the lens through which you view the world. And this is a term that I came across in a philosophy class in college, and it's a common term now in Christian education. But like I already mentioned before, my worldview was really this kind of compartmentalization. I had my education house over here and my faith house over here, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. You know, I was still a Christian when I was over here in my education house, and I was still a well-educated person over here in my faith house, and I didn't see why it mattered that they were separate. And my tipping point really came about 11 years ago with the birth of my daughter. As often happens with parents, you know, a kid comes in, we have a child, and it changes a lot of things. And for me and for my husband, it really started us thinking about our worldview and what we wanted our daughter to learn. And we were in a small group and we were studying the book of Genesis. And I don't remember what the exact conversation was, but in studying that beginning of Genesis, there were just some pieces that started to click together. And I kind of had this aha moment and this realization back when she was really young. And that moment kind of started to shift my thinking, and it's been gradually kind of changing from the time she was born till about the time she was 3 years old. There was this shift from Christian schools aren't important to why would anybody not go to a Christian school over the course of 3 years? So I just want to share a little bit of how that happened and then go back and address those misconceptions. So instead of having this 2-house system, I've kind of come to this realization that faith and education aren't separate. They aren't 2 separate houses. They should be one house right on top of the other. And if you look at that bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the first thing that became true to me or kind of finally sunk in is that faith is foundational. Now, for those of you who have grown up in the church or have been Christians for a while, you're probably like, yeah, well, obviously my faith is foundational. But here's what I mean. So we were studying Genesis, right? And Genesis says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes on to list everything that he created. Now, nowhere specifically does it say God created math, God created science, God created English, God created languages. But we see all throughout Genesis that, of course, he created those things. If you were to ask anybody who's a Bible-believing Christian, that's what they would say. Oh, yeah, of course, God created those things. God created these patterns and these laws of physics that we have discovered and named. But God created this. Of course, God created those. And as a Christian, if you had asked me that in high school, I would have said, well, yeah, God created those. But I didn't understand why that was important, what that belief had anything to do with my education. But if I honestly and truly believe that God created everything, then that should affect every other decision that I make. Okay, and here's why. Let's look at that second piece. Our purpose determines our course of action. Going back to Genesis, God created everything. He told us to have dominion over the earth. He told us to take care of his creation. We were created to worship him and care for his creation. Jesus puts that another way. Love God, love others. That is our purpose. So if God created everything, and my purpose is to love him and to love others, my purpose is to bring others to his story for his glory, then shouldn't everything that I'm learning, the things that he created, be a part of that? Shouldn't I be using math to fulfill my purpose? Shouldn't I be using English to fulfill my purpose and science to fulfill my purpose? Because God created those. They are God's. They're not separate from God. Right, so that led me to kind of my third thought here, where education should help fulfill our purpose. Going back and looking at my public school, if you ask what my purpose was in education, my purpose was to get good grades. The reason I got good grades was so that I could get scholarships. The reason that I got scholarships was so that I could go to a good college. The reason I wanted to go to a good college was so that I could get a college degree, so that I could get a good career, keep following my train of thinking here so that I could make money, so that I could be successful, so that when I die, I can leave an inheritance to my daughter, my family. There's no bigger purpose there. There's not. The only purpose is to learn for the sake of learning. It begins with birth and it ends with death. And that would be the end of what we do. But those of us who are Christians believe that there's more than that. There is an afterlife, there's a heaven, that there's more to being on this earth than just being on this earth. So shouldn't what we learn and how we learn it reflect that purpose? Education should help fulfill our purpose. At this point, I then realized public school can't do that. Public school can teach me a lot of things about math for the sake of math and science for the sake of science and English for the sake of English. And I could take my public school education, which I did, and go to a good college. But what I'm learning there isn't helping me or connecting with my purpose. It's separate. It's two separate houses. They're not connected. And public school in our society is never going to be connected to faith. So public schools are doing a great job teaching what they're teaching for their purpose. But where my thinking shifted is that my purpose is not just that. I have a purpose beyond what's here on this earth. And I need to be part of an educational system. And I want my children to go to an educational system that's educating them not just with math, science, English, and history, but math, science, English, and history to help fulfill their purpose. That brings me to this fourth part of the house, that education is built on top of faith. A faith is the foundation of the house. The education is on top of that. It's connected. It's one house. Now, there's one other little aspect in this clip art, this picture here that I really like, and that in front of this house, there is a gate. You know, we lock our doors all the time. We lock our doors when we're home. We lock our doors when we leave. We lock our car doors. We're very protective of our things. We want to be very careful that people aren't getting in who shouldn't be in, and, you know, not breaking in the middle of the night or not breaking into our cars. But when we talk about our educational system, shouldn't we as parents be the same way? Shouldn't we be just as guarded about what our kids are learning, whether it's directly or indirectly from their education system? If my child thinks that this life is only life to death and there's nothing else to live for, that's going to affect what she views her purpose as and the choices that she makes. If she thinks this 70 years is it, that's going to change how she views the world. And I want to make sure, I want that gate in front of my house so that I know who's coming in, who's affecting her education system. So having gone through kind of those four realizations, it became really clear to me that as well as the public school might teach content areas, it didn't line up with my worldview. It didn't line up with my purpose. And so it was time for me to make that shift to Christian education. But I still had some concerns. Remember those misconceptions I talked about at the beginning? Well, let's take a look at those misconceptions and see how I address those or what I found out about those. So if you remember, the first misconception is Christian schools offer subpar education. Well, once I actually, looked at Christian schools and went into Christian schools and did some research, I found out that this is what's actually true. Christian schools may have limited programs, but the educational component, the educational program, meets the same standards as all public schools. Here in the state of Virginia, we are an accredited school, which means that we can offer high school diplomas the same as any of the public schools. In order to be able to do that, our kids have to meet the same objectives and standards as those in public schools. From an educational standpoint, it's the same education. We offer algebra, geometry, algebra 2, pre-cal, AP calculus, if you're interested in taking classes with me. We've got AP government, AP US history. We've got all of the English classes, science classes, foreign language. We have to have all of those components in order to grant diplomas. So our educational program is the same. Now, we do have maybe limited programming outside of the core educational classes. And I'm going to address that at the end with that fear of missing out. But because of finances, they may not have as many extracurricular programs. But when we look at the core education program, they are going to be the same. My second misconception was that Christian school teachers aren't the best. And what I found out when I did some research is that Christian schools have a variety of educators, just like public schools. We've got new teachers, we've got veteran teachers, we've got career switchers, we have teachers with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, beyond doctorate, or beyond master's, but not quite doctorate degrees. Just like public schools, there are a range of teachers. In Christian schools, you're going to find the teachers that all the students love, and you're going to find the teachers that they don't love as much. In public schools, you will find the same thing. I had this idea that it was just a bunch of retired ladies or stay-at-home moms who decided not to stay at home, who decided to be teachers one day. And that may be the case in some schools, but in accredited schools, that's not the case. You're going to have a variety of teachers just like you would in public schools. The third misconception I had was that Christian schools are for rich families. For those of you that don't know, I worked in the office for a couple of years in administration, and part of my job was to help people who were applying to our school, and that included often filling out paperwork for tuition assistance. And most Christian schools have some kind of tuition assistance program, whether it's scholarships or grants or gifts or what have you. Most Christian schools have that. There is a cost to Christian schools. It's not supported by taxpayer dollars, which, by the way, there is a cost to public schools. If you thought they were free, check out your taxes. Your taxes do go to pay for public schools. So they're not free. They're just taken out of your taxes so you don't really notice them, where Christian schools you're paying directly to the school. So Christian schools do have a cost, but there are a variety of socioeconomic statuses represented within Christian schools. And go to any Christian school around the country and you'll find out that they're not serving just rich or just wealthy families. I have never been rich. I doubt I will ever be rich. And I am still able to afford to send my child to Christian school. And you may be thinking, yeah, Heather, you teach at a Christian school, so it's free, right? It's not actually. We do pay for her to go to Christian school. So I am making the same investment in my child's education as the other families who are sending their child there to that school. So it does cost money, but it's not just for the rich. If money is what's keeping you from even looking at Christian schools, I encourage you to reach out to your local Christian school, see what the options are as far as financial aid or tuition assistance goes. The fourth misconception I had is that Christian schools are outdated. So again, there may be schools like this, but what I found in the Christian schools that I visited and had a chance to talk to teachers is that Christian schools stay on top of changes in the field of education, technology, psychology, and more, just like their public school teaching peers, right? They have professional development. They go to workshops. They may not always have the newest and greatest technology. However, when it comes to what actually matters, understanding the development of the children that they're teaching and understanding the best way to teach those children, they're on top of it. and they'll do their best to provide the best education. They're not outdated. They're not using things that they've had for 40 or 50 years and, hoping that overheads and glue sticks still cut it, and that's it, right? They are using techniques and strategies that their public school peers are also using. The fifth misconception I had is that Christian schools are just like public schools, just with Bible class and chapel. Again, you may find Christian schools that are like that, but I would say that the majority of Christian schools go beyond just adding Bible and chapel. Because in public schools, you have the separation of education and faith, and never the two shall meet. In Christian schools, you've brought them together. There's a foundational difference, and because there's a foundational difference, it should affect everything that the school is doing and everything that the school is teaching. If the faith is really the foundation, then that's going to alter the rest of the house. If all the Christian school has done is taken the education house and added an addition for Bible, then I'm not really sure that they've understood that these two go together or foundational. So when I had this kind of thought that they were the same, just adding Bible and just adding chapel, what I've come to find is that, again, it goes back to purpose. Christian schools believe that your child has a purpose beyond just getting a good job, a good career, and being a good person. They believe in this purpose of loving God and taking care of his creation, loving God and loving others. And they believe that each subject is important to meeting that purpose. Math is going to help somebody somewhere love and take care of creation in a way that brings glory to God. Science is going to do that. English and history are going to do that. We have examples of students who have graduated from our school who have gone on to use what they've learned in math, science, history, and English to go out and fulfill their purpose of taking care of creation, loving other people, and in doing so, sharing God's story and bringing him glory. So Christian schools, the difference is not just Bible and chapel. The difference is the purpose, the reason why they are educating your child. The sixth misconception I had was that Christian schools only use Bible-themed resources. Remember, I mentioned here that I took that to mean, I think in my mind, that they were only reading stories from the Bible, using Bible stories to do math lessons. And what I actually found is that is not the case for most Christian schools. They do use a variety of textbooks and resources, just like public schools. I've seen Christian schools using Saxon math. I've seen Christian schools using all kinds of resources and textbooks. Now, most Christian schools are going to use textbooks that come from Christian publishing companies because those companies are going to share the same worldview, that education is built on the foundation of faith, and their textbooks are going to reflect that. That doesn't mean that they are only using Christian or Bible-themed resources. I taught high school English for several years, and we read a variety of books, a variety of literature. We read, To Kill a Mockingbird. We've read Fahrenheit 451. We read short stories by O. Henry and Ray Bradbury, and the list goes on and on and on. We've looked at Washington Irving, and I could sit here and list different books and stories and authors that we've read. We use a variety of textbooks and resources. We have access to many of the same technology resources that public schools do. So we're using MobyMax, we're using IXL, we're using BrainPop. Those are not resources created by Christian companies, and they're not Bible themed, but they help us meet those objectives. Remember, we have the same educational goals as public schools. We have to in order to be accredited. We have to offer the same type of education. So Christian schools, while they may use textbooks from Christian companies, do use a variety of textbooks and resources. My seventh misconception was that Christian schools try to shield kids from the real world. And I first want to say that, honestly, I think this is impossible, especially in our day and age with social media and the access that kids have to the real world or the fake real world, the online world. You can't shield kids from anything. They're going to hear about things that you would rather they not hear about. They're going to learn about things maybe sooner than you want them to learn about things. You can't just put them in this little protective bubble, and that's what I thought Christian schools were doing. But what I actually found is that Christian schools are actually trying to prepare students to think critically about the real world and to address issues from a Christian worldview. So they're going to encounter all different kinds of circumstances and situations. You can look at our world right now and all the issues that are being brought up in different cities and politically, and issues with the election and past elections. What we want our students to be able to do is not hide from those, but to engage with those, to have a logical and intelligent conversation about what they believe, and to be able to research and find out what they believe, and then to address those issues based on what they found out, and go out and make a difference in the world based on that Christian worldview of faith being the foundation for education. The eighth misconception that I had was this fear of missing out. And while it is true that most Christian schools do not have the same resources or programs that public schools have, what I came to realize is that no matter where you go, you're going to miss out on something. I went to 2 different high schools. I started in the Midwest, and we moved when I was in the 10th grade. And in my school in the Midwest, we had, for example, 3 different languages you could take. You could study German, you could study Spanish, or French. When I moved to my second high school, the one that I ended up graduating from, there were only 2 language choices. There was French and there was Spanish. So if I had wanted to study German, I would have been out of luck. Okay, that was missing out. I was part of, in my second high school, a program called Future Educators of America, which let me go into classrooms, elementary classrooms, and work with elementary kids. I learned how to write lesson plans. I actually taught lessons and worked with local teachers before I even graduated from high school, to kind of affirm that that was what I wanted to do. The first high school that I went to in the Midwest didn't have that program. I would have missed out on that if I had not moved. And so in thinking of that and looking around the local schools, no matter where you go, you're going to miss out on something. There's not one school that has every possible program that a school could offer. And what it really boils down to is what is important to you. What do you not want your child to miss out on? If there's a certain sport, and maybe sports are what's most important to you, you're going to choose your school or your options based on sports. If a language or a drama program or an art program, a required program, if those are what's most important to you, then that's going to guide your decision making. But if worldview and purpose, if that's what's most important to you, then that's what's going to guide your decision making. And the realization that I came to when my daughter was young, before she started school, was that was what was most important to me. The great thing is that we live in a world where almost everything is available online. If there's something that she wants to do or she wants to learn, it doesn't have to be at school. She can join a community sports program or a travel team if she wanted to try out for a travel sports team, if that was something she wanted to do that our school didn't offer. There's a local theater if she's interested in theater. There's a local arts conservatory where she could go sing or dance if that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to learn a language that wasn't offered at her school. There are online language programs. And so the great thing is that while our school may not offer all of the programs that maybe public schools can offer, she's not missing out. She still has access to those things, just maybe down a different avenue or a different path. But what it comes down to is what's important. And for us, what was important was the worldview, was education being built on faith, who is working together with us to help her understand her purpose, not telling her that she's a product of chance or survival of the fittest, but she was created with intentionality, and she was created by a creator who created her to worship him and to take care of his creation. And that was what made our decision so much easier when we decided to go into Christian school and Christian education. So, why Christian education? Well, hopefully I've explained it pretty well by now, but basically it boils down to these 3 points here. Number 1 is truth. The Christian worldview is the foundation for all learning in Christian schools. It's not based on this idea of evolution. It's not based on the idea of chance or humanism. It's the Christian worldview. And if I believe that God created everything, then shouldn't I acknowledge him in everything that I do, including education? The second reason I chose Christian education is because of the values that the teachers and the staff have. I know that they share the same values. And I had plenty of great, wonderful teachers in public schools who were also Christians who shared those same sets of values. But the school as a whole wasn't built on the foundation of truth. They didn't acknowledge that there was a greater purpose. I love that I can send her to a school, my daughter to a school, and I can work in a school where we pray for one another and we honestly care about one another and we value the same things. The third reason why we chose Christian education, both for me as a teacher and to send my daughter to, was, again, this idea of purpose. Education is personalized, and it helps her grow, my child grow, in a way that encourages her and encourages her purpose. Our Christian schools tend to be smaller, and the education program can be personalized. My child's not going to disappear and be lost in the masses. Somebody is going to know who she is. They're going to know her name. They're going to know her likes, her dislikes, and they're going to encourage her in those areas where she shows giftedness to use those gifts again for her purpose. To tell others his story, to bring him glory, to honor God and to care for his creation, loving God and loving others. And those three reasons are the primary reasons. It kind of boils down to why we chose Christian education and why I moved from public school into private school. So that's probably a little bit more than you needed to know. But if you are like me and you're back here not really realizing or understanding why Christian schools are important, why would I even pay for that? Why would I even think about that? But maybe you're being faced with this decision for the first time of what are you going to do? Then hopefully this was helpful to you. I really encourage you, again, don't just take my word for it. We want you to think critically. So go out and research the schools that are in your area. Find out what resources they have to offer financially. Take a look at their textbooks. See what their philosophy is. See who their teachers are, what their backgrounds are. Really get to know the school before you make any kind of decision, and think about what is important to you. Now, I've got some other resources I'm going to link in the description. One is another parent's view of Christian education from a Christian school in Ohio. She's going to say some of the same things that I mentioned, but she's got a few other things that I thought were really great points that she makes if you're looking for something else to read. Another video that I'm going to share, again, link in the description, is Why in the Worldview. This is an explanation of worldview and biblical integration, two terms that you'll hear in Christian education. A lot of people don't understand how I can connect. For example, I teach math. How can I connect math and Bible? Like, what do they have in common? They don't understand how they're connected. And so in this video, you'll hear a little bit about what worldview is and how that plays into, if faith is our foundation, how that affects math and English and everything else. And hopefully that will kind of clarify for you those two terms. If you are local to Winchester, Virginia, and you are looking for some options for next year, I encourage you to check out our website listed there, mvca.ccmv.com. We're on the hill right next to the DMV. Because we do have smaller class sizes and a large campus, we've got 33 acres outdoors, we are able to do 5 days in-person learning starting this August with social distancing. We'll be spending a lot of times in outdoor classrooms when we can, when the weather's nice, eating outdoors. We've got covered pavilions and picnic tables. So that'll help keep students outdoors as much as possible. Inside, we do have to limit our classroom sizes to make sure that we can maintain social distancing. So if you are interested in exploring Christian schools or private education, contact the school and see how we're doing on class sizes, find out information so that you guys can make that decision. Again, I hope this was helpful to those of you out there who, like me, don't see the value in Christian schools and maybe have some of the same misconceptions. Hopefully that answered some questions for you, and I encourage you to check out a local Christian school near you and see what they have to say about the program that they offer and why it's important. Thanks for listening, guys, and have a great day.